Hey guys, what's up? This is Leaf from Complexity, and you're watching the esports historian Thorin's YouTube channel.
If you want to support this channel and save 10% of some delicious Gamersup's energy formula, use the code Thorin, Thorin, at gamersupps.gg for 10% off. I'm actually drinking the lemonade one right now, my favourite flavour. Last month, Bleed added Nork, the Swedish AWPer, and Jacob, the Norwegian entry/aggressive rifler, formerly of Apex, both of them, to the roster. They actually went to a LAN, if people don't know. They went to the Misa Nomadic Masters Spring Tournament, which they finished second at, behind the Mongols. By the way, there's no shame losing to the Mongols right now. They're beating some of the best teams in the world. And it's not just that I want to do a video about adding Nork and Jacob and do one of those roster moves, should you remove this person. I actually want to do this video to kind of hype people on Bleed as a team and actually explain that it's a way better squad than you realise. The potential is way better. And actually, it's the development of the team from the genesis of the project to where it is now and what that actually infers about where it's tracking that I really want to highlight, because I actually think this should end up being a case study in how top figures who might be coaches or maybe former in-game leaders or something can build out squads, general managers. Obviously, he's sort of playing that role, Kassad. I want people to look at how he's doing it, not who the players are and just look at the player on the server, but look at the player on the server relative to the deal he's doing to get them, why he's taking a gamble on this player, or why he's building on this player, or why he's using this player as a stopgap. I actually think there's so much you can learn. This could almost be like the Rosetta Stone of how to make top teams. And I think actually right now, a lot of big orgs in Counter-Strike don't have the blueprint. I think they either have a figure who makes some good choices, or they're an enormous org so it's easy to attract big names and they pick some of the right players, or they just have loads of money and they overpay for the top talent. So the whole project, even though he's not a player, starts and for me ends with Kassad. Now, obviously, I have a bias. I work with Kassad. I consider him someone I'm friendly with. I've actually talked to him for years and years. I've always known he was legit in Counter-Strike. He's one of the people I also recommended to Cloud9 when they wanted to make that super team along with Henry G. So the thing is, the reason why it starts and ends with him is this is absolutely his project. You've heard people who were coaches and general managers, there's certain very famous ones you can think of, who talk like it's their project, but maybe they don't always get the choice of who to sign, or maybe they just get a choice of here's three names, which of those three do you want? Which is very different from you deciding the player that you want to join your team. Obviously, you might not have selected any of the three if that was the initial conditions that you'd been allowed, right? So I actually do think there's so much to be gathered from this squad. So let's start with the fact that Kassad obviously previously has quite a long history as a coach, as well as the brief one no one knows, which Peter told that story where he actually very briefly coached Team Wolf from India because there was this weird Indian qualifier for ESL 1 Cologne 2014, the one that was won by NIP, that major. So he briefly coached that team. Then later he worked with Mouse Sports when the people who were the coaches could actually essentially in-game lead. And he was, as far as I know, this is the era when he was slightly helping out with a bit of that. It was when Nico used to be the in-game leader of Mouse Sports in 2016, if people don't know. By the way, had a decent result, got in the top 4 at E-League, way better result than he'd expect. Then he obviously worked with Renegades/100 Thieves, mainly more on the Renegades side. If you don't know, he twice had them in the playoffs of majors in 2019. One time, probably should have gone to the semis. The other time, they did go to the semis. They actually beat Ents and were able to get all the way to the semi-finals of the Starlight Berlin major. Then he worked with Cloud9 when they made the super team, but only very briefly, because guess what? He noticed himself internally some of the problems there was going to be and knew some of the issues they were having. So he just bailed very quickly, and hence his name wasn't dragged down like Henry and Essetag, and for a while people like Mezzi, who actually the stain did kind of follow them around. And then obviously he worked with Extremum, which was basically Renegades but without JKS. Now you can say, as I often did at the time, well, what's kind of the point of Renegades without JKS, the best player? But to be fair, they did have Bentet, the old Tyloo/Gen G player, who, let's be real, has the skill of a JKS, and they hoped obviously that would work out. It just didn't end up being that good a project, even though I've heard, yes, people did get paid, and it was pretty decent in terms of the resources. So what the key thing is this: Kassad isn't someone who's just tried out there to be in any team he can be in or to always be working as a coach. He's clearly looking for more than just a coaching gig. He's looking for roles where either he knows the players and wants to work with them, or he has more leeway in agency himself. And now in this role, crucially for me, the reason he's taken Bleed instead of a much bigger org, a more famous org, is first of all, they have money, but he doesn't want to waste it. They have money and he wants to then wait for the right moments when to sign a bigger name, to spend money on a buyout. And crucially for me, because it isn't a giant org where you're only ever going to be a cog in the machine, he gets to have way more power over what happens within the org. Essentially, he gets to sort of be the general manager while also being the coach. By the way, ask people like Bill Belichick whether that's a pretty good position to be in, because obviously the problem in a lot of sports franchises is if you ever get a disagreement between what the coach wants when he's trying to win today and the general manager wants who's trying to plan for the next 10 years. If that's the same person, you can have a cohesive game plan, right? So of those teams he was in, Mouse Sports, Renegades, /100 Thieves briefly, Extremum and Cloud9. Cloud9 was the only one that was a big team in the sense that lots of players wanted to play for them. And by the way, at the time, because it was during the dreaded online era and people were only going for the big money, well, because you were building that team from scratch, actually you didn't even get the usual thing of people wanting to join Cloud9. Actually, a lot of big names, including maybe even some names in Bleed Now, turned them down, I heard. So the interesting thing is, I've done a whole bunch of interviews with Kassad over the last year or so about these concepts, like how do you build teams, what's a good buyout, how are teams like short selling themselves by doing crazy buyouts or setting the buyout themselves too high or not structuring it in an intelligent way. If you don't know, a very great point I thought Kassad made was, why not do it more like sports, where instead of it just being like, right, all this money up front now, and if you do this big signing now, I'll sell the player. It's like, nah, do it like sports. Like, if people don't know, I'm not a massive expert on football, but as far as I know, there was a whole thing where Dortmund, when they sold Jude Bellingham to Real Madrid, there was a thing in his contract where if he like won the Champions League, Dortmund got like, it's like $20 million or something mad. And if you don't know, the insane thing that ended up happening was when Bellingham went to Real Madrid, he actually ended up playing Dortmund in the final of the Champions League. But then when he beat Dortmund's team, they then got a whole bunch of money. Now, don't worry, you get way more for winning the Champions League than you do for that 20 million. So it's not like the conflict of interest meant that like Dortmund threw the game so that they would get this money. It would have been better for them to win the Champions League. But you get the point. That's a clever way to structure a deal. When he is in your team, Dortmund, he isn't yet the best player in the world, Ballon d'Or. So at that time, you're not going to get like the most crazy high number ever. But if you're Real Madrid, you do sign people for big money and you can afford it a lot. So a clever structuring of the deal is, how about this? We give you some money. We sign this player that was a star of yours. But how about this? We'll essentially hedge against the idea that it might be a bad move for you to let this guy go because he might go on to bigger and better things. So you know what? If he does the ultimate and wins the biggest prize, you actually get some money off that, because if we'd have known he was going to win the Champions League, obviously you charge us a lot more. So you can do this in Counter-Strike, guys. It doesn't have to be a massive dollar sum up front. You can do a deal where it's like, right, this player's a 200k buyout, but because like say 2 years ago he was a top 20 player on HLTV, you could have done something like this with a Blame F, by the way. I tell you what I'll do. If he makes top 20 in the year that he's in your team, as well as the 200k you give me, you then give me, I don't know, 100k extra because he made the HLTV top 20 or whatever. Now look, obviously this itself could lead in confidence, just like HLTV could then in theory rig it, but we're assuming a world in which they wouldn't and that the numbers aren't so much they're going to get drawn into this nonsense. Or the obvious one is forget HLTV top 20 if you want for a play. You could obviously just do accomplishments like the Champions League example I just gave with Jude Bellingham, right? What you could say is, I'll tell you what, I'll sell you this mega up-and-coming player. This would obviously be very applicable to like Russian players right now. And I won't make it the $1 million buyout. I'll do like a 500k buyout. But how about this? 500k buyout. And then if you make it to say like the major, then I get, I don't know, 50k. If you make it to top 8 in the major, then I get 100k extra. And you know what? Fuck it. If you win one of the next 2 majors, maybe actually I do get 200k more. And at the end, like I'm sort of getting close to what I originally asked for. But you can see how this deal works for both people. By the way, if that team that I sell this player doesn't make any success at all at the major, they don't have to pay the extra amount. So it's actually quite a clever way to sort of ask, like, how much do you believe in this person? Is it a cynical buyout? Do you want to sort of gamble against what you think they're going to do in the future? And if not, I'm also going to gamble. I'll say I'll have to pay out if they win big, but if they don't, then maybe I don't. I think this is a much more logical way to structure in a scene where, remember, no one is making a profit from these players playing the game and winning prize money, and actually the salary you pay them along with all the rest of the costs, you are losing money to run a team. So these are much more intelligent, in my opinion, ways to structure deals. So crucially, he has actually in this team lived and practiced what he preached and said he thinks the scene should be like. He's talked about this idea of bad buyouts. Like, if people don't understand, the core concept here is, A buyout's value is not judged on how good the player ends up being, because how could you know that? It's in the moment you make the buyout, is that a good deal or not? How much it costs, where he's coming from, what the, like, basically what the impact on your team, like, is this the one player you need, in which case your massive buyout might be worth it. If you need 2 more pieces, the massive buyout doesn't get you any closer necessarily to winning the major. So I would say this is why 2 obvious examples of deals, which actually, if you look at them, they have plenty of reasons why these are dodgy-ass deals. Like, the Monassi one's the best one ever. Because to a moron, you're an idiot if you think the Monassi deal was bad. Of course he's worth 600k. He's the best player in the world, Thorin. Yeah, he's the best player in the world in 2024. That deal was done before he'd ever played one big LAN match ever. And at the end of 2021 or early 2022? Like, 600k actually was overpaying at that time. There wasn't even, as far as I know, like a crazy bidding war like there would be now for a Monassi. Now, by the way, 600, you would fuck 600k. It'd be like $1.5 million or 2 million. Even if they were actually a nobody, it'd probably be like 800k. I mean, the story was that Donk was supposed to be like 1.5 to 2 mil before he'd ever played with this big lineup with the Shiro player. Obviously, it was back when they had fucking Art Frost, and he'd only done it at the small little Bet Boom or Dunhav type tournaments, right? Tournaments that nobody in the West even fucking knows or cares about. So people might not know that wasn't a well done deal. Now, the gamble paid off. In fact, it paid off incredibly if you G2. But you can't know that. And the point is, there are people out there, Skulls, etc., where you do those signings, most of them, because they're not fundamentally good deals in terms of how much you're paying and how structuring the deal, they're actually long-term not going to work out. Even if, by the way, in the case of a Monassi, like the Monassi is an extreme one because he's such an outlier, he's the absolute best player. So obviously in the end, that's going to work out, isn't it? But you can even argue, by the way, how did that 600k buyout work out the first year for G2? They didn't win a single tournament till the end of the year. And they already had Nico, but they were one of the best players in the world. So this is why actually the structuring of that deal would have made more sense also if it had been like 300k or 250k buyout, but then something like if you make top 8 of a major, by the way, they wouldn't have had to pay that the first year. But let's say they had made the run at the major, then you would have paid the money anyway, and it would have gotten to a similar sort of value, and it would have made sense for both parties. So in my opinion, one of the things Kassad understands is a sporting GM concept, which is if you're the big dog, then you can in theory buy the players you want, a la Real Madrid or a PSG or something like that, or back in the day, people like AC Milan, etc. Now in theory, those people want to join those teams, and they have the money to buy the players and pay almost whatever they want, right? But even that person actually still needs to evaluate how good a deal it is, because every time he fucks up and makes a couple of deals that are a few 100k more than he needs to, that will eventually be a deal he can't make, and that is money he has spent that he might not have had to. So if you're not the absolute top team, and obviously Kassad isn't on it right now, then you're going to, at that point in time, if you're smart, be making a mixture of gambles. Either you get this player cheaper than he's initially asked for, or you get some sort of special deal or structure a deal. That might make it extra value to sign him. Or maybe he's like a washed player that no one thinks is any good, but you think, I think there's a different way to use him. I don't think they put him in the right spots. I think this complementary player can help him. So you think I can rehabilitate this guy. By the way, a classic GM move. You get some guy who used to be a top player. He fell off a little bit, but now you bring him back. You put him in a different role that you think will suit him. Suddenly he's playing well. Isn't that Dupree in Falcons right now? Okay, we get that one. Obviously, I'll give an example of Bleed in a second when I get to the players. Another great signing you can make is, as opposed to like a really good player who costs a lot and then the buyout's going to be high because of war, why not get the player who will be a HLTV top 20 player next year or this year, but he hasn't done it yet. So you're getting the player who is yet to make it. There's another good player to buy because they're going to be very cheap now. And if you're someone who's an expert on Counter-Strike like Kassad and seen a million good players of all tiers come and go, you can probably pick the player who actually looks like other people's eye for talent isn't there. And he is better than you think. And he's not expensive yet because he hasn't made it yet. There's a good example of one. And crucially for me, as I said earlier, it's not that Kassad actually does play for a mega budget org and there's just no money and he just has to go on this approach. He himself is the one spurring this approach. If you know how much that org Bleed is supposed to have spent on the player Ye, who at one point was like the best player in the world in like 2022 in Valorant, they got this guy in, and if you heard the sorts of figures being thrown about, they have money. Like, they could go crazy. It's just if they go crazy, it's going to be a worse version of what happened to Cloud9. You can spend all that money. You're not going to probably get the results early on. It's a massive gamble anyway. And so why do it that approach? Instead, rather than sign some super team, I've heard he could have signed some big players to start out with. But instead of going the Falcons approach, he's going the other way. He started with a very humble set of gambles. Almost every player was a gamble. And then he used his influence the actual fact that they have money when the deal makes sense and doing shrewd deals to like some kid playing with like those stickers, Panini stickers back in the day of the playground where you trade them with people. This guy's traded up like a motherfucker. He's just got a way better roster a few months in than the one he started with, but he hasn't even spent loads of money. So think about this roster as I describe it. So the starting lineup, remember, Kassad himself joined in late November. In late December, they got Hampus, Faven, I think he himself says Faven, so I'll say Faven, and Cirque, right? So Hampus is obviously the Swedish in-game leader of NIP for a few years. If you go way back, people like Red Reserve and all that jazz, right? That is a brilliant pickup. That is actually one of the best pickups he's made from beginning to end because, first of all, what a great piece to sort of start your squad with because he actually has not only like legit individual rifle skills and has played in theory at the highest level. He's been in the playoffs of the majors a bunch of times, by the way. And also, he actually has developed his game as an in-game leader and now apparently wants to do the role. So if you look at that one, I actually think it's a mega pickup when you consider it's not insanely expensive. He's an undervalued player because he just hasn't done much for the last few years because of the NIP nonsense. And so since his stock was a bit low, and quite frankly, a lot of people thought like me, maybe it's the IGL angle because when Device was there, he didn't look that hot as an IGL. They just had all those good CT sides and he was giving me sort of fetish in 2014 Dignitas vibes. So in that world, I'm sure a lot of people also thought, well, I wouldn't mind him as a player, but I don't know about as an IGL. Well, Kassad saw, talked to him, figured out, I like this cut of this guy's jib, I think I know where he's going, and he's put him as his IGL. Well, you know what? Not only has it already worked out quite well, I think he's one of the pieces that can stay as you keep transitioning and doing more deals and trading for other players and buying players and signing players and letting players go. This guy can stay. Like the joke is in a year from now, if the team's actually capable like being almost top 10, he'll be one of the players that's there. So that's actually a mega foundational piece. And also, I think there are some players want to play with this guy. Maybe not Swedish players as much. Seems like a bit spicy as a Swede. I think it's more his friends that maybe want to play with him. Maybe they wouldn't fuck with his attitude. But I think all European players are going to be totally down with this player. Then you've got Faven. Now, Faven, if you don't know, is a gamble on a player yet to make it. Now, what's funny is he wasn't bad when he was in Big at all. But in Big, if you don't know, that he was the original Crimbo. He was the one who was supposed to come along and be the best German player, be set up to be a star, and then the likes of Tabs and the others would be the pieces around him, and then he'd presumably be a HL team top 20 player, and Big would make semis and big finals of tournaments, and maybe they'd win the odd smaller event. Now, that didn't happen. But if you ever watched his game, he does look like there's talent there. And by the way, his attitude seems really good. He just actually seems not a very egotistical player. I could see why he would fuck with playing with Kassad. I could actually see how Kassad could develop this guy and bring more. I think there's more to show from Faven that they couldn't get out of him in Big. And let's see, Kassad seems like he knows what he's doing, right? Then you have Cirque. Now, this one's a massive gamble, but it doesn't cost you that much because let's be real. This is considered a totally washed talent. And in the case of Kassad, he's thinking, it's because he's been in a North American team and he's been under bad cut. Remember, because I knows what goes on in EG. He was trying to join them for fuck's sake to turn it around. He knows that it was years ago with different people like Daps and Chet, etc., that this guy had his game together. And once upon a time, he was not only a very promising talent in Europe, he really was a top 20 player in the world. Those HLTV rankings were legit if you go back to 2019. In 2018, he showed a lot of promise. So yeah, he's had a bunch of years that weren't that good. Well, you know what? Orpa is one of the roles where you either better know all the best players in the CIS region or you just better pay $1 bazillion because it's such an obvious role to get a top player at. And seemingly every team that's not like winning events needs a better AWPer, right? So if you're going to actually save money on that role, you're either going to have to get like the craziest deal ever, or you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to pick someone who used to be good and gamble. Maybe they can either be good enough for this level or I can get them back there. So that was an interesting gamble. Look, it didn't actually really work out that well. It had some odd games at tier 2 and tier 3. But these gambles, not all of them can work. We're trying to, on aggregate, get to a better team and then figure out which gambles didn't work and then trade those pieces out. Then you had two more players. You had obviously Cypher, who's kind of your entry player. At this point in time, he came from TSM, but obviously everyone remembers when he was in Into the Breach and they made it to the top 8 of the major and he was actually dueling fucking literally against Ziwu and fragging about in that quarterfinal of the major. This was a player where another great signing because since Into the Breach had been slowly picked apart and then he joined that TSM squad that was just bad and they were was bad from the beginning, and they just looked like they just threw it in like the worst abusive case of using an entry flag. Like, just run in and die, don't worry about it. Like, they never had any fucking system around this guy. So the way they used him tanked his stock completely. Well, brilliant if you're someone like Kassad, because when this player's stock had tanked, remember, they even initially brought him in, and then everyone mocked him in this team. He was benched initially, and then they brought him back. And I was like, lol, Cypher. Well, you know what? If you watch this guy's game and you have an eye test, he has real mechanical talent. Seems like he has a really good attitude, like he's willing to be that guy who just does whatever you say. And he's really eager to learn and improve and build upon what he was able to do at that Blast Paris major last year. So again, what a brilliant player to gamble on. Like a player where people, even though he didn't actually play that long at the top, people think he's washed, but he's clearly a player that's yet to be. He perfectly fits both of the overlaps in the Venn diagram for that one. And then the last player was obviously Lonks or Laux, however you say it, the Romanian player. If people don't know, I'll just run through them. So Hampus obviously is Swedish. The in-game leader. Farvan's like one of your better riflers. He's German, obviously. Cirque is Bulgarian. He's Europa. Cypher is from the UK, and he was like your entry. And then Laux was another rifler, and he was on loan from Falcons, because that was the original Falcons with like the French players, if people remember. Now, that's a gamble. Interesting on this one, not for a washed player, not maybe, possibly for a player yet to be, but it's actually more for a difficult talent. People have sort of implied, I don't know, maybe it's something about this guy's work ethic or the way he fit the team or something about making him comfortable, because there are some skills there. I won't hype him as some big prospect, but clearly it doesn't always quite work depending on the makeup of the team. So this is another big gamble you're making, but it's for a player that, like, there's a reason he's had his chances in these other big teams, and he will be probably in the sort of OG sprout level teams of the world, because the people are going to keep gambling until a player like this makes it. It's kind of like a Boros scenario, right? Except that guy's made it to the top way faster. So you think of the changes since that 5-man lineup. So in April, the Lonks loan was just ended, and they signed Vladen. Now, the reason why that's an interesting move is the Lonks one wasn't really working. It didn't look like he was able to actually play his game or play as well as he'd even done in the past in Bleed, and Bleed wasn't a very good team. Well, the Vladen guy comes from Kassad's region. He is Serbian. And then also, we'd already seen him play a little bit of professional CS, because at the end of last year, he played at that CS2 Asia Championships with Ents, and they made it to the semi-finals and lost to FaZe, who won the event, if you remember. I think it was FaZe they played. And so already there's a play. You've seen Phil, presumably has a good attitude. You can talk to him. He's got your cultural background, and he's a stopgap. Like, I don't know if he really thought he was going to be there permanently. By the way, I think they're all in good faith signings. I think if you do play well and you show you fit the, I think Kassad will use you and will give you a full chance. But the point is, once the team then, as it did, starts to farm tier 2 and tier 3, and they were getting on these streaks where they were barely losing, they were only losing to really good teams at that level, and they were even able to take some of the like almost low tier 1 teams and show some promise against them. They were really farming these tier 2 tournaments. When that happens, eventually, if you're smart, you're then going to use the fact that you now have established the team and the core to add other players, or maybe now get a better, or maybe now, after a while of seeing what this team's made of, now you spend some money. So now the story comes that in May, Cirque is benched. He wasn't quite good enough as an AWPer. Vladen is benched. He doesn't have the experience. He has never been a top player. And who do you sign instead? This is how you fucking use money. You wait until those enormous buyouts, should be like $1 million something for Jacob and Nork at Apex, go down because the major's gone by, because we know the current upcoming circuit, Apex themselves are pulling out the game. They haven't had good results. And so you wait until those players are the price you want to pay. And then you get them. And you know what? They're players who want to play for Kassad anyway. Jacob already played for Kassad when he was in Renegades, didn't he? And then in Extremum after that. And as far as I know, I think they tried to get him for Cloud9. Nork is obviously someone who's a really talented player who used to work with fucking Hampus. He's already worked with that in-game leader. And again, if he's worked with Jacob, Jacob's going to tell him what Kassad's like. He's going to like, you're going to love it playing with this guy. This is the guy who took Gratisfaction to the semi-final of the World Championship. If I'm fucking Nork, I'm mad hyped to play with this guy. So you look at these ones. These are really good purchases. Like, if I'm going to pay buyouts, these are mega ones when you consider how cheaply he got them collectively. Go watch the episode of Feed the Trolls where he reveals the amount. Because Nork is already... Like, if the team has the results, this guy will be a HLTV top 20 player. It's just obvious. He's not the, like, AWPer that does the crazy, like, monacy, wonderful, non-stop flicks. He's the one who's just a really solid one who plays as a star, and he's more that sort of 1.15 rating AWPer than the crazy 1.3. Oh, my God! He's more that sort of AWPer. And by the way, he's already done it in the semi-finals of a major. If you didn't watch Blast Paris, he looked very good when he was doing it. So I already think that's a great pickup. He was always someone in NIP that had the talent. They just did weird things like sometimes make him not be the AWP, and then obviously they replaced him with Device. I can't blame him for that. Everyone would do that deal, including me, including Nork is the joke, right? Then the Jacob one is actually a sleeper, because I don't think people know, because Apex hasn't been that good since that Blast Paris Major. Jacob is pretty much never the problem in that team. Like, him and Crims have the craziest longevity I've ever seen. Like, look, if you want to talk about crazy longevity, obviously the outliers are, as usual, Simple, Divide. They're just at another level no one can be at. It's impossible they've even done it. But if you want to talk about normal pros who just kept being useful, meaningful, can keep their level up, Jacob and Crims are bonkers for how long they've done it for. Like, people will forget Jacob came around in 2015, guys. That's when this guy was relevant. Like, Crims himself, when he became relevant in, the end of 2013, early 2014, depends if you want to count when he was in LGB or when he later came to be in the squad, that actually was Fnatic. But I think people underestimate how actually good Jacob still is. The difference is, Crims' game has dropped off a lot more, and now he really is the ultimate fill. Jacob still plays his role as an aggro rifler, and he's a quality player. I've always thought, actually, one of the reasons why that player is so interesting to me, and I would have built like Cloud9 type super teams with a guy like this in them, is because he has the skills to be a star. I mean, go look at some of his numbers over the years. He should be a Headshot TV top 20 player many years. And in most of his teams, he should be asking for those roles. And his roles, he could ask for way more in terms of when he's on the outskirts, when he's in entry. But he looks like he's a guy who's willing to contribute, who's willing to sacrifice a bit. And his attitude, by the way, seems fabulous. He used to seem a little bit dour, or like he was a bit hard on himself in the early days. You go back to when he was in FaZe Clan. But I think after that, once he got into teams he was comfy in, that's a key thing in my opinion for him, to be in teams like Renegades, team like, I think Apex, these are ones where he doesn't want like crazy expectations or like too much scrutiny. I think you got to let someone like Jacob get into the cut, get comfortable, give him a little bit of responsibility. You also ask for a little bit from him. He's a guy who's going to perform way better than most people who would fit the role I just talked about. A veteran who's going to do all these things. Normally that player's going to be like an MBK who's just not that good nowadays. You know what I mean? This guy actually still has his skills. So I think these are fabulous pickups. Done at the right time when you've already proven which parts of the roster need to be upgraded. And you're making good upgrades and for reasonable money. And so Cirque's already gone, if people don't know, to some other fucking team. So think about what this squad is right now. The in-game leader, Hampus, is way better than you'd expect for this level of team and what they started with. And like I say, that player could be there if you became a top 10 team. How about your AWPer? Remember, I say in-game leader and AWPer, the hardest roles to nail, but potentially the most important. Your AWPer is Nork, who already was like a top 20 AWPer in the world / top 10 AWPer. It's like sleeper top 10 AWPer. So already that player could stay if you become a top 10 team. So we've got the two bases of the team could already stay and be in a year or two from now in a much better squad. Then let's go to the entry aggro rifler in terms of Jacob, who's been a star. You've done it again. You've now got 3 players that could all be part of this top 10. And then the other 2 players are Cypher and Faven. By the way, from the UK and Germany, 2 of the most promising talents those places have developed in years and years. Cypher just hasn't had enough time to know if he's going to make it or not. Faven only had that one real big squad that he could make it in terms of big, right? Now he's in this other team. This team's like, actually, it's like a sleeper, pretty well put together roster. And I also think, by the way, I'll just throw this in there, because it's already, in my opinion, gotten players to this team. Your coach / GM in Kassad is also way better than this org deserves. They're actually overqualified. I think Kassad's why you already got some of these players before, and why you were even able to get people to make a decision for sometimes less money, or to go to your org, a less established one, over a slightly bigger but also not massive org. I think actually the Kassad angle's underrated too. And now, by the way, that you've got people like Hampus, Jacob, this is how you also attract the other talents. This is how you get the other good players in there. And I also think a thing that Kassad's done in his career that's very underrated is, despite all this beef with Hooksy and random shitter fans, where are all the top players talking shit on Kassad, or ever implying in an interview like he was shitting his job or didn't know what he's doing or had a big ego? This guy not only doesn't have any of that, he seems to actually inspire a lot of loyalty in his players. They seem to fuck with his vision for the game and how to do things, etc. That's why actually you notice, like most sports managers and coaches, he has also used certain people time after time, year after year, because they're a known quantity, he's a known quantity. They both understand what the game here is, what the vision is, what the plan is, what their role is, and how they're going to build towards something bigger. And they believe in his vision. So I think if you look at this team, as of right this second, they have the pieces to be a top 20 team. Like a consistent top 20 team. I think it's really the case. They were bad at the beginning when it was the RMR, and they just jumped straight in there, even then they had that mad thing where one of the qualifiers, the guy registered for the wrong qualifier. That can happen to anyone, by the way. Then they farmed tier 2 and tier 3 once they got in Cypher and got that like better lineup. And now They're seemingly ready to do it on land with a better squad of players. And I'm very interested to see after this player break. Like I said, this team can creep into the top 20 already. And let's be real. If you've already done these moves and you haven't had to spend much money, either if you ever make the one big signing of the up-and-coming player who's really good for like 400k, or you get like a decent player who's still around for that, and you get one better piece, God forbid a star, you are going to be cooking with gas with this team. Like this team, that's why I say it isn't just about the specific names on this team, it's the methodology to how this team has been started, developed, and the shrewd decisions you've made along the way. And if they continue on this path, even if it scales up and costs more money, and we're talking bigger name players and sometimes bigger gambles, you could see how this can be a team that can be at majors and can do all sorts of things in the scene. Now, right now, I also have partners and people I work with that I don't mention on my YouTube. But did you know I'm doing a bunch of exclusive social media content, previews, predictions, trivia, etc. You'll be able to find it regularly. Just check out my pinned tweet on Twitter, /x.com. Don't you know I'm still standing better than I ever did? And that's in part thanks to my Patreon community, the Illuminati. So this video was kindly supported by Frisky, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Jensen Goh, Tobias Bernasconi, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Thooorin, Tosh, and you know it if you've ever seen my videos before. If you don't get to know it, because a special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Want to ask a question for my video AMA? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest? Maybe you want to see who the upcoming guests are on my shows, on my interviews. Or do you want to be part of one of those lengthy esports discussions where you set the table of topics? Well, if any of those perks or others catch your fancy, put your money where your mouth is and join the Illuminati today, where? Via the Patreon link in the description box.